All right, so we're going to talk about polar patterns when it comes to microphones. Now, polar patterns are basically the directional sensitivity of each microphone, and that some microphones can be very directional sensitive, or others may be more open to picking up just whatever's in front of it. It doesn't matter what it is in terms of condenser or dynamic or any of the other types. It really depends on the microphone itself and how the manufacturer made it. So let's go through the different types of polar patterns we have as options to us. So the first pattern we're going to look at is cardioid. Now, cardioid is pretty standard on most microphones these days. It's what the SM58 and 57 use, and it's basically this heart-shaped looking pattern if you look at the diagram. But basically what it means is that everything from about 180 degrees of the front-facing side of the microphone is going to get picked up. It's really good at picking up just about everything in front of it. But the sides, it starts to kind of fall off, and by the time you get to the back of the microphone, it's completely off. So cardioid polar patterns are kind of a standard polar pattern that you'll see on just about every mic. Now, if we need it to get a little bit tighter where we're rejecting more of the sides, then we can start getting into supercardioid. Now, supercardioid is kind of that next level. You can see on the screen here that it's starting to tighten up, but there is this little problem, is that we're actually starting to open up things on the back. That's just kind of how it all works. Unfortunately, we can't have this perfect rejection. Somewhere it's got to come back. So when we tighten things up with a supercardioid, we're actually going to start pulling in more information from the back. So this is where we start to get into the territory of supercardioid and monitors that are on the floor like wedges not being best friends, because you'll actually get some feedback issues at that point if that microphone's kind of aimed down at them. So if we want to tighten this pattern up even more for more control of less side rejection and more just what's right in front of us, then we can go to a hypercardioid pattern, which a hypercardioid pattern does this exactly, but it increases the amount of pickup from behind the microphone. So this is a no wedge zone. You cannot have floor monitors on this setup at all if you're going to be using this mic, because you will feed back. The chances are just really great because it's super sensitive back there now. But if you're on in-ear monitor systems or there's not a lot of sound sources coming into it from behind it, then you're going to be good to go. Now, these are the three most common polar patterns you're going to see on a stage. There's a ton more. In fact, in the studio, there's a bunch of more options that they'll use, and we're going to go through those here in a second. But these three options I just shared with you are the most common, specifically because in live sound, we're usually close micing just about everything, because we don't want to have any bleed from anything else. So we want microphones to pick up whatever is directly in front of them, and that is it. We're trying to isolate and have as much control at front of house as possible. However, in a studio environment where we're trying to pick up details of things and feel the openness of it, and we're usually only recording one thing at a time, having the option to have things like these next few makes a lot more sense. So let's go through those other patterns. So this first non-standard polar pattern we're going to talk about is the omnidirectional pattern. Now, on a microphone like the C414, which again I shared earlier with you is one of my favorites for overhead miking, that microphone actually has a second diaphragm on it. It's got two in there, and they're kind of like sandwiched together like that. And one of them faces one direction, one of them faces the other. The reason is that it has the ability to change modes, and we can change it to omnidirectional, where it captures a 360-degree image of what is happening around it. Now, it's not a 3D signal or a stereo signal. It's still just a mono sound, but what it is actually happening is that it's picking up everything around it equally. So when we hear something happening on one side versus on the other, it's the same level, and it's as if it's always in front of us. So the reason why we might use something like this is if we're trying to capture the room or the openness and ambience of something and capture all of it and capture all that detail as it floats around the space. Not something we use necessarily live because we want to just isolate again, but we want to capture the openness of something. Omnidirectional may make more sense. So the next one after omnidirectional, it actually kind of takes a step backwards, and it's called bidirectional. Bidirectional kind of does the same thing as omni, where it captures both sides evenly. However, it creates these little pockets on the sides of rejection where there's a quiet zone. It's kind of a place you can hide things. So it's almost like capturing one side of a wall and one side of the other wall. It's this way of capturing both sides equally, but having space where it kind of deadens out between so you can hide things. So again, this isn't a popular polar pattern you're going to see live, but it is an option available to you. Again, that's usually used in the studio, but it is available to you if you have the microphone that can do it. Okay, so in the last video, we talked about the shotgun microphone, right? So how does it actually reach out and grab just the sound that's way out in front of it and not just like everything, with it being this super long, weird looking microphone? Well, it's actually kind of a cardioid microphone on steroids. There's not much of a name for it, but basically what it's doing is it's taking the concept of cardioid and just stretching it out so that way it just picks up what's way out there on the end, and it rejects everything on the sides and everything behind it. So that's why the placement of a shotgun microphone makes so much sense to put it underneath a PA speaker or back up and above it, because then it's rejecting all of that information and it's specifically just capturing the floor and the people on the floor singing. So shotgun microphones are kind of like this super steroid feely cardioid microphone, if you will, without the negative, pickup on the back. So those are polar patterns for microphones. I hope that kind of made sense. And in this next video, we're going to start talking a little bit more about some of the other gear we use to capture sound sources live on stage.